In this video, we're going to learn about plasmolysis and hemolysis. And this is a very important topic in biology. So if you look at this picture here, this is a normal cell, and this is a cell that's already been plasmolyzed. Okay, so we're going to learn how to define plasmolysis and hemolysis, explain how each process occurs, and distinguish between plasmolysis and hemolysis. So what do you think happens to a plant cell in a very concentrated salt solution? And which direction do you think the water will tend to move? So when you say very concentrated, it means a solution that have high amount of salt. So in my last video, I explained different types of solution. I explained hypertonic, hypotonic, and isotonic solution. So a solution that have large amount of water, where do you think is going? What do you think is going to happen to the water solution? Is it going to move out of the cell, or will the cell be able to obtain large amount of water? What do you think? So we're going to give you 2 seconds to think about the direction of where the water is going to move. Okay, so water leaves and the cell's contents shrink, and this process is called plasmolysis. Okay, so if you look at this analogy here, you can see this diagram here. You can see that in this cell, this cell contains high water concentration. What happened to the water? They tend to move out of the cell. So once they move out of the cell tend to shrink. And when they shrink, it is said to be plasmolyzed. All right. Okay. So in this cell here, this cell accepts a lot of water. So I receive a lot of water. What happens? Become turgid. So which means it becomes swollen, become turgid, and this give rise to hemolysis. Become hemolysis. Don't forget, hemolysis only occurs in red blood cells. Okay, so I'm just giving you a kind of idea of what happens in both times. So yeah, when the water leaves the cell become flaccid, and become flaccid, we say that plasmolysis have occurred. But when a cell have too much water, it become very turgid. So the cell can tend to burst, just like the red blood cells, which gives rise to hemolysis. Just a clear explanation. So what is plasmolysis? So plasmolysis is the shrinking. When something shrinks, it means something escaped from the cell. So for example, a cell that has a large amount of water, when the water tends to leave the cell tends to shrink. Shrink. So the shrinking of the cell content away from the cell wall when plant cell loses water by osmosis. So this is what shrinking is very important. Water tends to leave the cell, so the cell shrink and become flaccid. Okay, and the cell wall content is being removed, and plant cell lose water by the process called osmosis. Okay, so if you look at this picture here, this first one here is already plasmolyzed. Why? Because water tend to leave the cell. Okay, and when water leaves the cell, what happens? The cell become flaccid. Okay, become highly flaccid. All right, so the next thing here, I wanted to understand just the analogy of what this plasmolysis is all about. So, for example, if you add air into a balloon, what happens to the air? The air become filled. Okay, so if you remove the air from the balloon, what happens? It shrinks away from the walls. So okay, what actually happens is that once you remove the air from this balloon, what is going to happen? It becomes shrink. Okay, once the cell have more water, it become turgid, and once the water content to leave the cell become flaccid, just like what's happening to this balloon. It increases when you have a lot of air, and when the air removes, what happens? Become flaccid. So the cell become flaccid, and in this process we call it plasmolysis, because what happens? The cell tends to shrink away, and most plants, once they lose a high amount of water, they start to wilt. You see that during the dry season, you see that most plants tend to wilt. Why? Because the water content are already leave the cell, and the cell become flaccid. Now, quick example: a plant cell is placed in a concentrated salt solution, and water tend to move. So you have your cell, you have a salt solution. So the cell loses water and become highly plasmolyzed. And the type of solution that make this to happen is a hypertonic solution, which is what a very strong solution. When a solution have high amount of salt content or high amount of what sugar content. Okay, so you have a salt, you have a water, and you have a saline water. So this type of solution is called what a hypertonic solution. So this type of solution encourage what we call what plasmolysis. So it's very important for you to know the type of solution, and when the water leaves the cell, you need to understand what the process. You need to understand the name of the process that actually occur, which is plasmolysis. So it's very important. So the next one we need to learn here is hemolysis. So which is just for the reverse of the case. The previous one is water leave the cell, but in this hemolysis, water tends to come into the cell to make the cell turgid. Okay, so hemolysis is the bursting of the red blood cells after excessive water enters into the cells, and it can occur in a very dilute hypertonic solution. Don't forgetting, plasmolysis is hypertonic solution, but hemolysis is what hypotonic solution. So in this analogy here, waters enter, the cell tends to get swollen, and what happen when the cell become highly swollen, it tends to what to burst. Okay, so here the red blood cells, when the water gets to the cells, become swollen. Then when it become excessively swollen, what happens? It tends to also burst. This is what we call hemolysis. And the type of solution that occurs here is the hypotonic solution. Okay, so for example, just a easy analogy. Now look at this lady that blows air into her mouth. The mouth become what filled with what air. Understand? So if you use that for a cell, is that the cell is highly turgid because you have high amount of water content. Okay, so think of a water balloon. Too much water makes it what to swell. Okay, and eventually what happen? It may what burst, which occurs in what in red blood cells. Very good. All right, so this is it. Once you add too much amount of air, what happens to the balloon? It tends to what to burst. So this is what hemolysis, and hemolysis occurs in red blood cells that have contained large amount of water. Okay, just in a kind of comparison between plasmolysis and hemolysis. So in plasmolysis, plant cell, water leaves and the cell shrinks. With hemolysis, red blood cells, too much water enters and the cell tend to burst. So that is different. So the first one for the plasmolysis, it occurs in what a hypertonic solution, and for hemolysis, it occurs only in hypotonic solution. So the first solution is a strong solution, while the second solution, which is hypotonic, is what is a soft solution, not a strong one. Okay, so quick challenge: plant cell plus concentrated salt solution, which is a hypertonic solution. What type of reaction occurs? That is what plasmolysis. Red blood cells plus pure water may cause what? What's it going to cause? Hemolysis. Now, when the cell content pulls away from the cell wall, means a lot of water will be move from the cell. What happens is plasmolysis. Very good. Okay, so multiple choice questions that you can use to understand this topic very well. So all you need to do is to pause the video, answer the question while I give you the correct answer. What is plasmolysis? A. Swelling of an animal cell, shrinking of the cytoplasm away from the cell wall, bursting of plant cell, division of a plant cell. So the answer is B, which is a shrinking of the cytoplasm away from the cell wall. Okay, so the next one, plasmolysis occurs when a plant cell is placed in what type of solution? Is it hypotonic? Is it isotonic? Is it hypertonic? Or is it pure water? So it's hypertonic solution, which is a strong solution that contains high amount of salt. What happens to a red blood cell when it is placed in a hypotonic solution? So hypotonic solution is not a strong solution. So this is a solution that contains high amount of water. So A, it loses water and shrinks. It remains unchanged. It gains water and may burst, and it becomes plasmolyzed. So the answer is it gains more water, and what happens? It tends to what burst, just like in hemolysis. So the bursting of a red blood cell due to the excessive entry of water is called what? Is it plasmolysis? Is it hemolysis? Is it diffusion? Is it turgidity? So the answer is what? Hemolysis, which is the bursting of the red blood cells. Then which statement correctly compares plasmolysis and hemolysis? A. Both occur in the plant cells. B. Plasmolysis occurs in red blood cells, while hemolysis occurs in plant cells. Plasmolysis involves the loss of water from plant cells, Why hemolysis involve the bursting of red blood cells, and D, both involve cell gaining water and becoming turgid. So the correct statement is plasmolysis involve the loss of water for plant cells, while hemolysis involve the bursting of the red blood cells. So it's very important to understand all these things. It can be very confusing. Hemolysis, hemolysis is the bursting of red blood cells and it occurs in hypertonic solution. Plasmolysis is the shrinking of the cells and it occurs in what in a hypertonic solution, whereby a strong solution is what's present. So it's just for you to understand the type of solution and the processes that occurs and what type of cells does this processes normally occurs. Okay, so I'll see you in my next video. So in my next video, I'm going to show you an experiment on osmosis using a potato. Okay, see you in my next video and goodbye for now.